I want to talk about here is victory conditions. I kind of mentioned that the white spaces or white flag spaces are important to victory conditions. Essentially, the big ones are Paris and Berlin. If CP can control, or Germany can control Paris, essentially the Western Allies are going to get one more turn, so the current turn will continue. Um, and then the Western Allies, during their turn, they have to liberate Paris, or the game ends with an automatic um, Central Powers victory. Same thing happens for Berlin. If the Triple Entente is able to capture Berlin, the turn will continue. It'll roll back to Germany, and during Germany's turn, if they can't liberate, they can go through combat. And if at the end of their combat phase they have not liberated Berlin, game ends immediately with a Triple Entente victory. Those are the two automatic victory points. Um, Difficult to do because again, Western Front is a lot of tough sledding to get any progress over there, but it's possible that it could happen. The other way it happens is going by victory points. Basically, if you go all the way through fall of 1918, you're going to go into final scoring. And what that gets is you get one VP for each of your enemy home areas. So their colored spot, you'll get one VP for, um, and each enemy square production area controlled by an alliance. So square production areas. So if the Turkey is able to hold Sinai or Basra, those are the square production areas. They get victory points for those. Um, the CP, if they hold Russia, they get 4 victory points. And again, they've got to keep some units in there to control that. So if Russia's knocked out of the war, that's the max that the Central Powers can get is 4 points. If the U.S. never declares war and doesn't join, Central Powers get 1 point for that. So if they're able to kind of keep the U.S. from joining, they can get some points there. If the East Africa track is down to only one army, either Leto Vorbeck for the Germans, um, or the British East Africa Expeditionary Force, that side then receives one VP. And the only way that can happen is either the Germans attack, flip these guys, British player doesn't refit them, they attack them again, they push them out, and they take it. Or likewise, the British army is able to push the Germans all the way back to Rhodesia and then attack into there and remove the German army. If either of those things happen, that side can get one VP. So again, one VP might be worth doing some stuff down there for. If both armies are still on that map uh, at the end of the game, nobody gets any points. So it becomes a stalemate. And then the Central Powers can get one VP if any of the following things happen, right? So if Greece joins the Triple Entente, um, and the CP then goes in and controls Greece, they can get a VP. Or if Salonika is marked as closed, so there's an event that'll come out. Basically, the king basically says, "Yeah, we're not gonna join the Entente." Or if Greece remains neutral for the whole game, and um, the events cards that kind of talk about Greece came out, so they still stay neutral, but the things happen, then the CP can still get a point there. And so that's all of the victory points that's going to happen. And then at the end, you're going to total each side up. Um, the CP has to get at least 7 points higher than the Triple Entente for them to win. So basically, that's a better than historic outcome. Anything else, the Triple Entente wins. So again, CP's got to get kind of a threshold of 7 more net points. So it's actually pretty tough sledding for the CP. I think they've got the harder hill to climb. Uh, the the Triple Entente, they're more about holding the status quo, because status quo is that they win. Um, the Central Powers has to really take a lot of space. They've got to knock Russia out. They've probably got to get Italy in the war and take Italy out, get some points there, maybe grab a couple home areas in France. Um, East Africa could be important for them and swing. That could get at some points. Greece could be important for them. They've got to get those. So really, I think the work is on the Central Powers in this one from my um, half a dozen times or so that I've played this game. It's really on the CP to play aggressively and take a bunch of stuff, because they're starting kind of behind the eight ball, and they've got a tough sled to get going. And so that is the victory conditions, and we'll move on from victory conditions into turn number one and show how the game kicks off. It's a normal turn in terms of how things typically go in terms of turn sequence. However, there is some kind of start on rails to kind of get the ball rolling. There's some forced attacks that both Germany and the Western Allies have to do, that very much simulate the initial attacks by both sides. And that's really the only scripting that happens in the war. Other than that, it's very much a sandbox type game, which I like. Allows you to really, based on the events that come out, based on what the condition is, you might have some ahistoric stuff. One time I was able to get the CP and Germany to push through northern Italy and up through southern France, and they were able to take Paris by coming through the Alps. I was able to do that, I think, by the end of 1916 in one game. Triple Entente were rolled really, really bad in most of their attacks for the game for that to happen. But weird things like that could happen. Again, you could have where Russia stays in, the war never drops out, and they're able to maybe get some stuff together and push into Germany and put some pressure on Berlin. That could happen. So really interesting game, really some cool stuff that happens. We'll go through it and turn by turn and show you what we mean. But for now, that's our kind of overview and victory conditions. We then look at the turn sequence. If it was Germany, it goes on the Western Allies. If it was Western Allies just finished, it goes to the Eastern Allies and US. If they finish, it goes to Central Allies. At the end of the Central Allies turn, the game marker is then advanced. If it's pre-printed, so in winter 1914, Turkey would immediately enter the war. All the Turkish forces would then be deployed per the force pool set up on the back of the player aids. Other event marker things, if we go into spring of 1915, this removes the restriction on building of trenches. Now all countries can build trenches and go from there. The next thing that happens at the beginning of each turn, Germany, Western Allies, Eastern Allies, Central Allies, since they're in a new year, when they move from 1914 to spring 1915, or from winter 1915 to 1916, or from winter 16 to 17, or winter 17 to 18, each time they move into a new year, they're going to take their deck. So when it's the Western Allies' turn in spring, every spring, they're going to look through, they're going to take all the cards in this deck that have 1915 on them or greater. So all of these have a 1915 symbol on them. And they're going to take all of those events with anything remaining in their event deck, and they're going to shuffle them together. So that's really what's going to happen every spring. That's where you're going to get the flavor. So we can see from Triple Entente, Gallipoli invasion. So have to do Gallipoli invasion. Italy joins. That's something that could happen there. US entry marker +1. Treaty of London. Depends if Italy's neutral or not. Could declare war. Salonika for Greece. And inspired leadership. That's all the 1915 events that happen with just the Triple Entente. And so this is where you get a lot of the flavor of the game and a lot of things that happen. But because they're in a deck and they're being shuffled, they're not going to come out in the same order that they came out historically. And so that's what gives you kind of that sandbox feel. Some of these events may not even show up because you have four, with the exception of 1918, that only has two turns, and 1914 that only has 2 turns. You usually have 6 cards, but you have 4 seasons each year. So you're going to have extra cards. And as you get further into 1917 and even into 1918, You might still have the cards from 1914, 1915, 1916, 1917. They might still be in your deck. So a lot of those have a plus on it. So 1915 plus, meaning that they could happen at any time in 1915 or later. There's a handful of events that have a very specific window on when they might happen, and they only happen in that window. Um, and it's usually the early events. I think the 1914, each deck has like a 1914 and 1915 event, so it's only an event that happens early. Any that if it gets drawn, it just gets discarded, and your side doesn't get to play an event that turn. Events can be beneficial, but there's also a lot of events that um, are not super good for the player that draws them. So there's some negative events in there as well. And because this isn't something that you hold in your hand, you're just flipping it off the top of the deck. It makes this game very, very easy to solo. In fact, it's one of my favorite like big solo games. I'll set it up and I'll just play solitaire to kind of see how things happen. And so that really takes us through the event phase and then moves us after the event phase. You build your deck, you draw your event card at the start of your turn after you build and shuffle your deck. Then you're going to go right into the movement and then combat phase. And see my videos on those to look at how movement and combat works in the game.